Emma Rodriguez zipped up her daypack for what should have been a routine solo hike on Old Rag Mountain and vanished like morning mist. For 7 agonizing months, her family refused to give up hope while search teams turned up nothing but empty wilderness and fading trails. But when a Virginia Tech geologist discovered something disturbing in a remote cave, it would shatter everything investigators believed and expose a nightmare lurking in Shenandoah's wilderness. Before we begin this investigation, let us know where you're watching from in the comments and subscribe for more mysterious disappearance stories like this one. The Shenandoah National Park stretches across the spine of Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains, a 200,000-acre sanctuary of ancient peaks, cascading waterfalls, and dense hardwood forests. For over 4 million visitors each year, it represents escape, renewal, and the timeless beauty of the Appalachian wilderness. The park's crown jewel is Old Rag Mountain, a challenging rock scramble that rewards hikers with panoramic views stretching from the Piedmont to the Allegheny Mountains. But beneath this postcard perfection lies a darker truth. The same isolation that makes Shenandoah magical also makes it dangerous. The park's 500 miles of hiking trails wind through terrain so remote that a person can disappear completely, swallowed by hollows and ridgelines where the sun barely penetrates the canopy. Emma Rodriguez understood this duality better than most. As a 25-year-old occupational therapist from Richmond, she had been using hiking as part of her own healing process for the past 2 years. The mountains had become her sanctuary after a difficult divorce, a place where she could process her emotions while challenging herself physically. She wasn't reckless or inexperienced. She was methodical, always telling someone her plans, always carrying emergency supplies. Her apartment in Richmond's Fan District reflected her growing passion for the outdoors. Topographic maps of Shenandoah were thumbtacked to her bedroom wall, marked with colored pins indicating completed trails. Her hiking boots sat by the front door, permanently muddy from weekend adventures. Her camera bag held thousands of photos capturing the park's seasonal transformations. Friends would later describe Emma as someone who had found herself in the mountains. Her ex-husband, David, had been controlling, discouraging her love of hiking as too dangerous for a woman alone. But in her post-divorce life, Emma had reclaimed that independence with fierce determination. She hiked solo regularly, finding strength in solitude and confidence in her ability to navigate challenging terrain. The plan for October 14, 2018, was ambitious but well within her capabilities. She intended to tackle the Old Rag Circuit, an 8.8-mile loop that included the park's most famous rock scramble. She had done portions of it before, but never the complete circuit. It would be her personal milestone, a way to mark how far she had come in rebuilding her life. Her preparation ritual was thorough. She laid out her gear the night before. Her well-worn Patagonia daypack, a first aid kit, plenty of water, energy bars, her rain jacket, and her Canon camera. She studied the trail map one final time, noting the key waypoints and bailout options. She set her alarm for 5:30 a.m., planning to hit the trail by 7 o'clock to avoid crowds and finish before dark. The drive from Richmond to the Old Rag parking area takes about 2 hours, winding through Virginia's horse country before climbing into the foothills of the Blue Ridge. Emma made the drive in her silver Honda CR-V, her music playing softly as she watched the landscape transform from suburban sprawl to pastoral farmland to forested mountains. She arrived at the trailhead parking area just after 7 a.m. The lot was nearly full even at that early hour, a testament to Old Rag's popularity. She found a space near the back, shouldered her pack, and began the ritual that had become second nature. Checking her gear, adjusting her boots, sending a quick text to her sister Maria with her expected return time. The text, sent at 7:15 a.m., will be the last communication anyone would receive from Emma Rodriguez. It read simply, starting Old Rag Circuit. Back by 4 p.m. Weather looks perfect. Can't wait to see the views. She tucked her phone in her pack's side pocket, took a deep breath of crisp mountain air, and stepped onto the trail. Security cameras at the nearby visitor center captured her walking toward the trailhead, a lone figure in burgundy hiking pants and a gray fleece, moving with the confident stride of someone at home in the wilderness. She had no way of knowing that another figure was watching from the tree line, someone who had been studying the parking lot's patterns for months, someone who had been targeting solo hikers with calculated precision. The Old Rag Trail begins gently, winding through mixed hardwood forest along a well-maintained path. For the first mile, hikers are lulled into thinking this might be an easy walk. The trail crosses several small streams, passes a few modest waterfalls, and gradually gains elevation through a forest painted in autumn's most brilliant colors. Emma would have been in her element during this section. Friends knew she often stopped to photograph details others might miss. The delicate frost patterns on fallen leaves, the way morning light filtered through the canopy, the intricate patterns of lichen on tree bark. Her camera's memory card, when eventually recovered, would show she had taken over 40 photos during just the first 2 miles of hiking. The trail's character changes dramatically as it approaches the base of Old Rag's rocky summit. The gentle forest path gives way to a challenging boulder scramble, requiring hikers to squeeze between massive granite formations, climb through narrow passages, and negotiate steep rock faces. It's this section that makes Old Rag famous, a natural playground that demands both physical fitness and mental focus. For experienced hikers, the rock scramble is exhilarating. For someone like Emma, who had been building toward this challenge for months, it would have been pure joy. The technical climbing requires complete attention, forcing hikers into a meditative state where nothing exists except the immediate challenge of finding the next handhold or foothold. But somewhere between the gentle beginning of the trail and the demanding rock scramble, Emma's solo adventure had taken a terrible turn. She had encountered someone with dangerous intentions. When 4 p.m. came and went without word from Emma, her sister Maria felt the familiar tightness of worry. Emma was never late, never careless about check-in times. By 6 p.m., with sunset approaching and still no contact, Maria's concern had escalated to panic. She called Emma's phone repeatedly, each call going straight to voicemail. At 7:30 p.m., as darkness settled over the mountains, Maria made the call that would transform Emma from a missing person into the center of a massive search operation. The Shenandoah National Park Emergency Communications Center received the report with practiced efficiency, but there was nothing routine about what followed. Park Ranger Jonathan Matthews was the first responder dispatched to the Old Rag Trailhead. A 15-year veteran of the Park Service, Matthews had coordinated dozens of search and rescue operations. Most ended with embarrassed hikers emerging from the woods a few hours late, full of apologies and stories about losing the trail or stopping to enjoy an unexpected view. But when Matthews reached the parking area and found Emma's silver CRV still sitting in the lot, still locked, still undisturbed after 12 hours, he knew this case was different. A quick check with the nearby business owners confirmed the vehicle hadn't moved since early morning. Emma Rodriguez wasn't just late. She was missing. The National Park Service search and rescue protocol activated with military precision. By midnight, the incident command post was established at the park headquarters. Teams were briefed on Emma's planned route, her experience level, and her known gear. Search grids were drawn on topographic maps, dividing the vast wilderness into manageable sectors. The first crews hit the trail at dawn, moving in coordinated sweeps along Emma's intended route. The Old Rag circuit is challenging but well-defined, with limited opportunities to wander off course. The searchers expected to find her quickly, probably injured from a fall during the rock scramble, possibly with a broken ankle or leg that had prevented her from hiking out. But as the morning progressed, the search teams found nothing. No signs of distress, no gear dropped along the trail, no indication that Emma had ever deviated from the established path. It was as if she had simply vanished from the mountain. The discovery that would define the early phase of the search came from an unexpected source. A group of rock climbers working their way up the technical routes on Old Rag's east face spotted something unusual wedged in a crevice about 50 feet below the main trail. It was a burgundy piece of fabric, the same color as Emma's hiking pants described in the missing person report. The technical rescue required specialized equipment and expertise. A team member rappelled down to investigate, finding not just the fabric but Emma's entire daypack, wedged tightly in a narrow gap between two massive boulders. The pack was intact, all zippers closed, showing no signs of damage that would suggest a catastrophic fall. Inside the pack, searchers found Emma's camera, her water bottles still half full, her energy bars untouched, and her first aid kit unused. Her wallet was there, her phone was there, even her car keys were there. Nothing was missing except Emma herself. The location of the pack created a puzzle that defied easy explanation. The crevice where it was found was not directly below any section of the regular hiking trail. For the pack to end up there, either Emma would have had to deliberately climb far off the established route, or someone would have had to place it there intentionally. Search teams immediately focused their efforts on the area below the pack's location, theorizing that Emma might have fallen and her body was somewhere in the jumbled maze of boulders and steep terrain. But 2 days of intensive searching with dogs, technical rescue specialists, and even thermal imaging equipment turned up nothing. The mystery deepened when the K-9 units were brought to the scene. The dogs, trained to detect human scent, showed intense interest in the area around where the pack was found. But instead of following a trail down the mountain, which would indicate a fall or an attempt to seek help, the scent trail led in the opposite direction, deeper into the wilderness, toward areas where few hikers ever venture. The trail was strong for about half a mile, then abruptly disappeared near a small creek crossing. The dogs circled frantically, whining in frustration, unable to pick up the scent on the other side of the water. It was as if Emma had been transported across the creek by some means that left no trail. For 5 days, nearly 200 searchers combed through 25 square miles of wilderness. They used helicopters, drones, ground teams, and even specialized cave rescue units to check the numerous small caverns that fit the area. They found nothing. No trace of Emma, no additional gear, no evidence of what had happened to her. On the 6th day, weather forced a suspension of the search. A late-season hurricane tracked up the coast, bringing driving rain and winds that made helicopter operations impossible. For 48 hours, as the storm battered the mountains, no one was in the field. When crews returned, any remaining scent trails or subtle clues had been washed away by torrential rains. The official search and rescue operation concluded after 2 weeks. The final briefing was somber, attended by Emma's family, park officials, and the volunteer searchers who had donated their time and expertise to the effort. The conclusion was unavoidable. Emma Rodriguez had vanished without a trace in some of the most thoroughly searched wilderness in America. For Emma's family, the end of the official search marked the beginning of a different kind of agony. Her sister Maria took leave from her teaching job to coordinate a private search effort. Her parents, Carlos and Isabel, drove up from their home in Norfolk every weekend, posting flyers and talking to anyone who would listen. But it was Emma's ex-husband David who surprised everyone with the intensity of his response. Despite their bitter divorce, he threw himself into the search with an obsession that bordered on desperate. He hired private investigators, posted rewards, and spent his own money on additional search teams. Friends later said guilt was eating him alive, that he blamed himself for discouraging Emma's hiking during their marriage. As autumn turned to winter and the search efforts gradually wound down, Emma's disappearance settled into the grim category of cold cases. The Park Service kept the file active, promising to investigate any new leads, but with no physical evidence and no witnesses, there was little to investigate. The case attracted attention from online amateur detectives and true crime enthusiasts. Theories proliferated on social media and hiking forums. Some suggested Emma had staged her own disappearance, starting a new life somewhere far from Virginia. Others theorized about animal attacks, despite the complete lack of evidence. The most persistent theory involved foul play, but without evidence, it remained pure speculation. Winter in the Blue Ridge Mountains is harsh and unforgiving. Snow blankets the high peaks from November through March, and temperatures can drop well below zero. The park's backcountry becomes largely inaccessible, visited only by the most hardcore winter hikers and the occasional research scientist. It was during this frozen, silent season that Emma's case went completely cold. The media attention faded, the reward posters grew weathered and torn, and gradually, the hiking community moved on to other tragedies. But for those who knew Emma personally, the questions never stopped gnawing. Maria Rodriguez couldn't accept that her sister had simply vanished. She threw herself into research, studying every similar case she could find. She learned about the phenomenon of people disappearing in national parks, the statistical anomalies that suggested patterns too disturbing to contemplate openly. She discovered that Shenandoah had seen an unusual number of disappearances over the past decade, particularly involving women hiking alone. Most were eventually explained by accidents or medical emergencies, but a few remained unsolved. Maria began to wonder if Emma's case was part of something larger, something the authorities weren't sharing with the public. Spring arrived in Shenandoah with the usual explosion of wildflowers and returning wildlife. The park's busy season began, bringing thousands of hikers back to trails that had been empty for months. But for the Rodriguez family, the season brought no renewal, only the painful reminder that Emma should have been among those returning to her beloved mountains. It was during this season of rebirth that Dr. Sarah Chun arrived in Shenandoah to begin her research project. A geological survey specialist from Virginia Tech, Dr. Chun had received a grant to study soil erosion patterns in the park's wilderness areas. Her work would take her far from the popular trails, into remote sections of the park where few humans ever set foot. The project was part of a larger conservation effort, examining how climate change was affecting the park's ecosystem. Dr. Chin's specialty was identifying areas where erosion threatened to undermine trail systems or damage sensitive habitats. It was meticulous work, requiring her to hike cross-country with soil sampling equipment, GPS devices, and geological survey tools. On May 15, 2019, 7 months after Emma's disappearance, Dr. Chun was working in a remote drainage about 3 miles northwest of Old Rag Mountain. The area was officially part of the park's wilderness designation, meaning no motorized vehicles or permanent structures were allowed. It was a landscape of steep ridges and narrow hollows, where century-old trees created a canopy so dense that hikers needed headlamps even during midday. Dr. Chun was following a small tributary, taking soil samples every 100 yards to measure erosion rates. The work was physically demanding, requiring her to navigate through thick undergrowth and scramble over fallen trees. She had been working alone for most of the morning when she noticed something that didn't belong in the natural environment. Partially hidden by a fallen oak tree was what appeared to be the entrance to a small cave. Caves weren't uncommon in the area, but this one caught her attention because of what was scattered around the entrance. Pieces of modern trash, definitely human in origin. As a scientist, Dr. Chun was trained to observe and document anomalies. She approached the cave entrance carefully, noting several details that seemed unusual. There were the remains of old campfires, dating back several seasons. There were rusted cans that had once contained food. Most disturbing, there were pieces of women's clothing, faded and weathered, but clearly not from hikers who had simply lost items from their packs. The cave itself was larger than it first appeared. What looked like a small opening expanded into a space big enough for a person to stand upright. Dr. Chin used her headlamp to peer inside, seeing evidence that someone had been using the cave as a regular shelter. There was a makeshift sleeping area, storage spaces carved into the rock walls, and modifications that suggested long-term habitation. But it was what she found in the deepest recess of the cave that transformed her geological survey into a criminal investigation. Partially buried under loose rock and debris were human remains, clearly visible in the beam of her headlamp. Dr. Chun backed out of the cave immediately and called 911 from her satellite phone. Within hours, the quiet hollow was swarming with law enforcement officials, forensic specialists, and investigators who understood they were dealing with something far more sinister than a hiking accident. The initial forensic examination was conducted by Dr. Michael Torres, the state's chief medical examiner. Working by generator-powered lights in the cramped cave, Dr. Torres carefully excavated and documented the remains. His preliminary assessment confirmed everyone's worst fears. The bones belonged to a young, adult female, and there were clear signs this was a homicide case. The dental records comparison took 24 hours. When the results came back, they confirmed what everyone had feared and hoped for simultaneously. The remains were those of Emma Rodriguez. After 7 months of agonizing uncertainty, her family finally had an answer, though it was the answer they had dreaded most. The forensic examination confirmed the worst fears of investigators. Emma had died from injuries consistent with homicide. The evidence suggested she had been held against her well before her death. The medical examiner's report revealed this was clearly not an accident or natural causes. But the cave held more secrets than just Emma's remains. As investigators processed the scene, they uncovered evidence of extended human habitation spanning several years. The cave had been modified with shelves, storage areas, and even a crude workshop where someone had been repairing equipment and preparing supplies. Among the items found were pieces of identification belonging to other women, driver's licenses, credit cards, and personal items that represented a horrifying collection of trophies. The names on the documents sent investigators scrambling to check missing persons databases across multiple states. The pattern that emerged was terrifying in its consistency. Over the past 4 years, at least 3 other young women had disappeared while hiking alone in Shenandoah or neighboring wilderness areas. All were experienced hikers. All had been careful about safety protocols, and all had simply vanished without explanation. The cave represented something that challenged investigators' understanding of how criminal predators operate. This wasn't someone who struck opportunistically and moved on. This was someone who had established a permanent base of operations in one of America's most visited national parks. Someone who had been targeting victims with methodical patience for years. The forensic evidence pointed to their suspect being someone with extensive knowledge of the park's backcountry. The cave's location was so remote that it couldn't be found accidentally. Someone had specifically chosen it as a hideout, modifying it over time to serve as both a residence and a prison. But the most chilling discovery came when investigators found the workshop area in the cave's depths. Among the tools and equipment were detailed maps of the park with specific hiking trails marked. Parking areas were noted with symbols indicating optimal surveillance positions. Popular camping spots were identified with codes that seemed to rate them for vulnerability and isolation. This wasn't random violence. It was systematic targeting, planned and executed by someone who understood both the terrain and the psychology of solo hikers. The maps showed observation points near trailheads, escape routes that avoided ranger patrols, and detailed notes about seasonal patterns of park usage. The investigation took on new urgency when the forensic report revealed that Emma had survived for some time after her disappearance. The implications were heartbreaking. While search teams had been combing the mountains looking for her, she had been held captive in the remote location, likely calling for help that would never come. The task force assembled to hunt Emma's killer included FBI behavioral analysts, Virginia State Police investigators, and National Park Service law enforcement rangers. They were dealing with an offender who combined the territorial knowledge of a longtime local with the methodical planning of an organized criminal. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Park maintenance records showed that several years earlier, an employee named Billy Ray Thompson had been fired for repeated violations of park regulations. His offenses included illegal camping, setting unauthorized fires, and harassing female visitors. More significantly, he had been caught building unauthorized shelters in remote areas of the park. Thompson's employment record painted a picture of someone who knew Shenandoah's backcountry better than almost anyone. He had worked trail maintenance for 6 years, giving him access to the park's most remote areas during his official duties. Even after his termination, he had clearly continued living illegally in the wilderness, using his knowledge to avoid detection by park rangers. The investigation into Thompson's background revealed a pattern of escalating antisocial behavior. After losing his Park Service job, he had struggled to find steady employment, drifting between temporary construction jobs and odd work. Neighbors described him as increasingly isolated and hostile, particularly toward women. But Thompson had vanished from his last known address over a year earlier, around the time the first disappearances had begun. Investigators realized they were dealing with someone who had completely disconnected from normal society, living full-time in the wilderness and supporting himself through theft from campers and hikers. The manhunt for Billy Ray Thompson became one of the largest law enforcement operations in Shenandoah's history. Teams of agents and park rangers swept through the backcountry, checking every known cave, abandoned structure, and remote camping area. They used thermal imaging helicopters, trained tracking dogs, and even psychological profilers who tried to predict where Thompson might hide. For 3 weeks, the search found nothing. Thompson seemed to have vanished as completely as his victims had. But investigators had one significant advantage. They understood his territory. The detailed maps found in the cave gave them insight into his movement patterns, his preferred hiding spots, and his psychological attachment to specific areas of the park. The final confrontation came at dawn on June 8th, at a location investigators had identified as one of Thompson's secondary campsites. A tactical team approached the area just as Thompson was returning from what appeared to be a scouting mission, possibly seeking another victim. He was arrested without violence, though his demeanor was that of someone who had already mentally checked out of human society. Thompson had been living in the wilderness for so long that he seemed genuinely surprised to encounter other people, as if he had forgotten that the outside world still existed. The interrogation of Billy Ray Thompson revealed the full scope of his crimes. Over the course of 4 years, he had killed at least 5 women who had been hiking alone in Shenandoah and surrounding wilderness areas. Emma Rodriguez had been his most recent victim, but she wouldn't be his last if the investigation hadn't stopped him. Thompson's method was always the same. He would observe parking areas and trailheads, identifying women hiking alone who appeared to be experienced enough to venture into remote areas. He would follow at a distance, sometimes for hours, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike when his victims were far from any possible help. The cave had served multiple purposes in his criminal operation. It was his home base, his storage facility, and his prison. He would capture victims and hold them in the remote location. The isolation was so complete that no one could hear calls for help. His confession provided closure for families who had been wondering about their missing daughters for years. But it also revealed that investigators had probably interrupted an active cycle. Thompson had been scouting potential victims when he was captured, and he admitted he had intended to continue his crimes. The trial of Billy Ray Thompson was a media sensation that brought unwelcome attention to Shenandoah National Park. The revelations about his years-long criminal spree in one of America's most beloved wilderness areas shocked the public and raised difficult questions about park security. Emma's family attended every day of the proceedings, seeking some measure of justice for the daughter and sister they had lost. Her mother, Isabel, gave victim impact testimony that left the courtroom in tears, describing not just her loss, but her anger at a system that had allowed a predator to operate freely in what should have been a safe space. Thompson showed no remorse throughout the trial. His demeanor suggested someone who had moved so far beyond normal human emotions that the proceedings were simply incomprehensible to him. He seemed genuinely puzzled by the attention his crimes had generated, as if he couldn't understand why anyone cared about his victims. The jury's verdict was swift and unanimous. Guilty on all counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and related charges. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without possibility of parole, ensuring he would never again have the opportunity to harm innocent people seeking solace in the wilderness. But for Emma's family, the trial's conclusion brought no peace. They had their answers, they had their justice, but they would never have their daughter back. The Emma who had found healing and strength in the mountains had been destroyed by the very place that had saved her from her previous trauma. The Rodriguez family established a foundation in Emma's memory, focused on educating solo hikers about safety protocols and supporting search and rescue operations in national parks. They couldn't bring Emma back, but they could perhaps prevent other families from experiencing the same devastating loss. The case had a lasting impact on how the National Park Service approached security in wilderness areas. New protocols were established for monitoring remote areas, tracking suspicious individuals, and responding to reports of missing hikers. The balance between preserving wilderness solitude and ensuring visitor safety would never be simple, but Emma's death had made it a conversation the Park Service could no longer avoid. Shenandoah National Park remains one of America's most beautiful and visited wilderness areas. The Old Rag Trail where Emma disappeared continues to challenge and inspire thousands of hikers each year. The mountains themselves are unchanged, still offering the solace and renewal that drew Emma to them in the first place. But for those who know Emma's story, the wilderness will never feel quite as safe. Her case serves as a permanent reminder that the greatest dangers in the backcountry don't always come from natural hazards. Sometimes they come from those who exploit the very isolation that makes wilderness beautiful to harm the innocent. The Blue Ridge Mountains keep their secrets well, but sometimes those secrets are darker than anyone wants to acknowledge. Emma Rodriguez came to the mountains seeking healing and found tragedy instead. Her story echoes through the hollows and ridgelines of Shenandoah, a cautionary tale that reminds us to stay vigilant, even in the places we go, to feel most free.